it's making. That's what I like about this myth.
Can I ask one of the things? Did he say anything about the asteroid belt?
Yes.
And the
yes.
theory that perhaps it was.
What he does say, we'll see it there in the creation myth, is that it was left over from a war in heaven between the angelic beings. That's what he says about the asteroid belt, which I think is neat because I think there was a planet there. My suspicion is there was a planet where, in that asteroid belt, there's something called the Titius-Bode formula. These German mathematicians who worked out the mathematical ratios between the spacing of each of the planets is such that exactly where the asteroid belt is, there ought to be a planet. It predicts that. As you get further out, the formula gets further and further off, so where you get to Pluto, where it's just totally off. But it's close enough to fit the mathematical formula. And I think there probably was a planet there. We have evidence that Uranus was knocked on its side by something. That's a big damn planet. What knocked that over up onto its side? Who knows? I think there was a woman who was doing a thing where, Velikovsky had said that this comet had come in from Jupiter, and it sort of split off from Jupiter, and that this was a variation of the myth of the birth of Athena from the head of Zeus. And this comet came crashing near the Earth, and eventually it stabilized to become the planet Venus, and that this was why Venus is so hot, and why it spins slowly backwards. It's spinning backwards, very retrograde, still hot. And Velikovsky had suggested that it came from Jupiter, whereas some woman whose name I've forgotten had mentioned that she thought it fit more the myth of the separation of the genitals of Uranus, and that it may have been one of the moons of Uranus. Venus may have been split off from one of the moons of Uranus, because you remember that Saturn castrates Uranus and throws the genitals out into the ocean, and they produce Venus, Aphrodite. So she had this idea that Venus may have been one of the moons of Uranus that got displaced all the way out here. There's some strange things about Venus. It's an anomaly in more than one respect. And that's his thing about the asteroid belt there. It's this sort of war in heaven. And I think I'm particularly fond of Velikovsky because I think that we really don't know much about the solar system at all, particularly with respect to its history. We really don't. And I think the thing is a lot more chaotic than we tend to think that it is. And I think more evidence will turn up for that. We've seen comets crashing into Jupiter, and scientists are beginning to accept this sort of, we're not in this stable, harmonious solar system. It is stable and harmonious, but it's also chaotic. And there's that. So should we break for lunch then and take an hour? To the center of the Earth, which is the planet Ego, is in the center of the Earth, he says. So the planet is actually focusing spiritual energy from the sun into the Earth's very core. And he says that all plants share a single plant ego. Whereas he says, with respect to animals, the animal ego exists within the astral world, and they share group egos. Each species has its own ego that exists within the spiritual world, the astral plane. Whereas the plant ego exists within the higher world of lower Devashan, the lower Devashan, rather than the higher one. How he reconciles that with it being in the center of the Earth, I'm not sure. But anyway, it's very interesting. I just want to draw your attention to the way in which he tries to weave the cosmos together. And what's going on the Earth is something that is constantly involved with the planets. And I've got a transparency with me here. This is from William Merwin Thompson, who will end up with the model. But this is a model of the cycle of the planet Venus, and it's the configuration that Venus actually makes in the heavens as seen from the Earth represents a five-petaled geometrical shape. And so plants with five petals are normally regarded as plants of Venus because they have this configuration. And this is from his whole analysis of the fairy tale of Rapunzel, where he sees Rapunzel as a personification of the plant Rapunzel, the Rapunzel plant, which is a self-fertilizing, autogamous, autogamous rather, plant that he sees being embedded in this fairy tale. just to sort of illustrate the interrelationship between plants and planets. Sure.
Yeah, go right over here.
I see. Interesting. Every 8 years it makes this little flower. It's neat. I really like it. Yeah, Thompson found it in this fairy tale, in Rapunzel, as the whole story illustrates the cycle of Venus. This is just a blackboard drawing of Steiner's version of the Christ myth, which we'll get to in a moment, as the sort of Christ being descending down into the earth and incarnating this golden thought, and Christ being sort of incarnating the earth. And I'm just throwing these in here for fun right at the moment. And this is his, he has a comparison between the plant and the human being, where he says human beings are essentially upside-down plants. The genitals correspond to the blossom and the flower of the plant. The brain corresponds to the roots. And his whole medical theory is developed on this, because he says when you want to treat someone, in terms of this, he sort of divides the human into these 3 sections. The nervous system, the sort of nerve and sense system, is sort of centered in the head, although it's perfused through the whole body. And the torso, the mid-system, is the circulatory system, where you have the heart and the lungs corresponding to the root, the head corresponding to the root, and the torso corresponding to the stem and the leaves of the plant. And the limbs and the lower intestine, the whole metabolic system corresponds then to the leaves and the top of the plant. Such that when you get disorders in these 3 systems, what you want to do is prescribe the corresponding areas of the plant. For example, if you're treating, if you use chamomile flowers for the digestive tract, you're taking them from the petals of the chamomile for the digestive tract. Digitalis, the heart medication, is drawn from a plant, from the leaf of a plant, which is in the sort of middle. And then he says, like things like carrots are good for the head. Carrots is just pure root, and it's good for the head system. And so he developed his whole medical theory out of this, which I don't know enough about in detail to go into. There's a whole other series of books on that he wrote on his medical theory that I haven't gotten to. Yeah, and then there's another one of his blackboard drawings, just sort of illustrating the tension between the spiritual world and the material world. He's very fond of using these colored chalks and the gravity of the sort of material dimension, the Ahrimanic plane, we might say, and the Luciferic world of the spirit, sort of illustrating the relationship between them. These are all things taken out of the context of specific lectures, which I'm sure would make a lot better sense if we had the whole lecture. This is from his creation myth. It's just a certain epoch, which we'll get to in a moment, illustrating that the Earth, he says the Earth was once a gigantic living beast, and it is now a sort of dead animal in many respects, but it was once alive. And then, in a sense, the Gaia hypothesis, the first thought you have is, wait a minute, isn't Gaia saying the opposite? But actually, the Gaia hypothesis has been compared to these giant trees, where the only living part of the tree is the outer part of it. Is it the cambium? Is that what it's called? The bark, and the entire core of the tree is dead. These giant trees. So the Gaia hypothesis has been compared to that with respect to the life on the Earth as the living aspect of it. And there's another vision from, as we'll see, one of his creation myths with this epoch, which we'll get to, when he has these sort of gigantic prehistoric beasts flying around. And then these will make better sense in a moment. I had intended to do these last, but and this is his illustration of the withdrawal of the moon from the Earth, and we'll see why that had to happen. There are actually theories that the moon may have been pulled out of the Earth, and in his mythology, it's one of the central events, other than the incarnation of Christ. If the moon had not pulled out of the Earth, we would not have been able to begin the reincarnation process.